Yeah, just in the habit of saving your work, just save it as something. I'm just going to go QMD Quarto markdown. The folks who have been implementing Quarto and bringing Quarto markdown to the Posit universe, Charles Teague and his team, they wanted to make this process as easy as possible. In order to make a Quarto markdown, a Quarto dashboard, we changed this HTML to dashboard. And if you ever heard a Josh Starmer statistic video, I'm going to copy his tagline. Bam. That's how we do it. All right. From there, we should have some content. If we use a level 2 header, 2 hashtags, that's going to make a row. And let me just put in some words there so that this will show up in the output. And let me quick render and hope that my live coding doesn't crash right in front of you. So you see what I have here, 2 rows. In particular, I have 2 cards with content that can now fill out the cards. Let me see if I get this side by side so it's a little easier to see. From there, if we wanted a further subdivision of a row, we could make columns by having a level 3 header. So while I'm clicking the render button, to yourself, go ahead and guess what this will look like. There we see 1 row with a card. In the second row, we now see that's been split into 2 columns, each with a card. I should have warned Lydia that we are going to move now into a breakout room. Let me tell you what I have planned for you. So right now, what I'm thinking is that first level headers are for tabs, second level headers are for rows, and third level are for columns. However, depending on your workflow, and especially later on, if you're making a dashboard for people who are using a phone to visualize this, you could actually change up the orientation to say columns instead. So notice that it'll switch to rows and columns and how the headers are used. Now, in your breakout room, what I want you to try to do is what I did. Create a new Quarto document with the columns orientation and try to create this layout that you see here on under activity 1 in the slides. So go ahead and try that out. Let's see how are we doing, folks? Were there any more questions or comments from your session?
Okay, if we try to see the output, but if we do like in the Posit cloud, we render it's blank. So we couldn't see the output, but so far, so the YAML has been settled, and maybe a bit of like clarification about how to make a row inside a column. changing so the pound sign, increasing the pound signs. That was a bit of but we tried to see the output, we couldn't.
Okay, thank you for the feedback. I'm glad you all are figuring out the headers and whatnot. For the output itself, sometimes it's a browser issue that sometimes the software wants a pop-up window. If it makes it easier for you next to the render button, you could click on preview in viewer pane, and that might be easier for us moving forward in this workshop. All right, moving right along, I assure you that I'm not going to have you type out every single line of code, especially when we get to the ggplot stuff. Down in the bottom right, you'll notice that I have some template files available for us to have us move at a brisk pace. In particular, you'll notice that I brought in the code libraries. I brought in some objects that we could use. What I'm thinking of is in column 1, row 1, that's where I, at the moment, want to put my main graph. And I made this in advance, and I'll show you the ggplot code later. But for now, I just have that stored as an R data object. In order to put an object, such as a graph or a table, into your dashboard, you place the code chunk there, like usual, into your Quarto document. So now, there in my first column, first row, I have what I call the New Jersey plot. Now, you'll notice that unless you work with this data all the time, it still might not be completely obvious what you're trying to show the audience there. Furthermore, before I forget, you'll notice that words such as column 1, row 1 are actually not showing up on the plot anymore. You could use these headers to organize your layout, knowing that these particular words will not show up. However, there may be times when you do want words to show up. One of the Quarto code chunk options for our purposes that you can use is called title. So I could add a title to this code chunk, render the document, and notice now where main bar chart appears in our Quarto document. Now, while we're here, I thought we would also look at what are called value boxes. In Quarto, to help us bypass some messy work with CSS, there are these environments called fenced divs. As long as the opening and closing has the same number of colons, you've now created a sub environment. In order to create a value box, we do dot value box like this to essentially make an, I'll just use the word attribute of the fenced div. There are some icons coming from the Bootstrap icons library. There are a few of them that you could try out in the future. I'm just going to pick one for now. And at least for my purposes, I happen to know the hex codes of the colors for my university. So I'm just going to use that. If you have colors you like, that's great. But I guess you're under my preference right now. And of importance as we proceed, what goes inside the value box itself is also our output, whether it's a string or a number or something. For now, I'm just going to put in a placeholder so that we can see where this is showing up. Rendering the document. Ooh, I got an error. Let me just consult my script.
I think you're missing
Thank
a
you.
quote at the end of the color.
Yes, I am. Smart crowd. And value box. Boom. Okay, so I'll give you a few more seconds to look over the code, match up what it did in the dashboard.
Derek, can you please explain again what is the value box, or is it just gonna be like a box where you can put what type of content? I'm not sure.
Yes, for our purposes, a value box is a place where if you really want to emphasize a number to the audience, this is an idea of how you could do that, rather than asking them perhaps to go through the entire dashboard. But folks, so go ahead now, back into our breakout rooms, try out activity 2. Note that I want you to click on the template 1 document first, and then try out these activities. Hey all, welcome back. Yeah, to make this even more interactive, I should have emphasized that as you're making those value boxes, you could have different icons from in the Bootstrap icons library, which has its own website. There are a couple hundreds icons that you could have chosen from, which in my opinion is somewhat useful, but depending on what you're working on in your business or research, it still might not be expansive enough for your purposes. But, you know, it's up to a matter of opinion. Another question in chat. I have found this in some frameworks such as Viz Network or what we're doing now with value boxes. When you're working with colors, some of these frameworks only accept colors directly in their hex code. You might not be able to use the words such as light blue that you were acquainted with from other R programming. So yes, when you're trying out these additional frameworks in your R programming, you might have to use the direct hex code for your colors. Are there other questions or comments that arose during your work there?
We have
Alrighty,
one,
folks. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
we have one weird instance where if you put only one word into a box, it makes the whole box bigger, because for some reason Quarto adds additional paragraphs if it's two or more words, which then shrink the whole thing and make it consistent. So you have to add like a fake empty paragraph if you only want like a single word.
Thank you very much. For what I have on the screen right now, I had no idea why that was happening. Thank you very much.
I mean, we also don't know why it's happening, but it seems like a weird edge case.
It is. I'm glad we are all learning together. With that said, cross your fingers. We are going into the second half of our workshop, and it's the tougher portion. Let's talk about some interactive content. Oh, we have a variety of people in this wonderful audience, but just in case, let me go over what we R programmers mean by the Shiny interface. A Shiny app is, as you construct it, usually thought of as a pair of programs that are working together, namely the user interface and the R server. As you see in this diagram coming from the Introduction to Data Science textbook, from the UI to the R server, we have our user inputs, the top arrow. The bottom arrow, from the R server back to the user interface, we have our server outputs. Basically, for our purposes here, in making an interactive Quarto dashboard, we have to keep track of the user inputs and the server outputs. Looking at this diagram made, I believe, by Dr. Tedladeras, we have, again, the UI and server. And in particular, I'm looking at the code there in the purple block on the bottom right. We have, for the input object, we could access and attribute as input $ something. For the output object, we could access and attribute as output $ something. We'll just need to keep that in mind. Now, I'm going to furthermore just be a little haphazard here. I'm going to try to show you the frustration in making a interactive Quarto dashboard for the first time, in that this is still a relatively new technology, in my opinion, and some of the tutorials out there might not show you everything. What you're paying me for, or not paying me for, is to show you that everything. All right, I'm skipping ahead a bit. I have the promised ggplot code, etc. And what I eventually want to do is put this code where that bar plot is now. It is essentially the same bar plot, but I want to do this in the shiny way. What we're going to do is, from the output object, we are going to have a state plot, and for the purposes of shiny, you have to take a plot object and run it through the render plot function. Being careful of the parenthesis here. If we just had a simple text, we would have to run that through the render text function. And again, we're keeping track of the inputs and outputs. Apologies, I did get a little ahead of myself. It's usually more customary when talking about Shiny to talk about the user interface first. I should have done that. What I want to do is take this layout for the dashboard and perhaps give this a sidebar. Somewhat similar to a value box. The way you make a sidebar is with let's go to level 2 header, and then you can see dot sidebar in these attributes. I'm crossing my fingers, hoping this works enough to this point. And whoa, output not found. That's not good.
It has to be context server.
See, now you're ruining the ending of the story, but thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, you were not okay.
Yes, but you are exactly right. Let me get there. When you run Zoom, it takes away your ability to comment out code. There it is. Okay. Okay, so in the sidebar, let's talk about the user interface. I'll skip ahead a bit. We have a select input. Hopefully this works. Ooh. And you are exactly right. We need to be able to tell this server or tell the program that we are using Shiny in the first place. So you'll notice that I had a bit of code lacking. Let's see if we could fix this live on air. In the YAML, we will need to tell our studio and the software that we are indeed using a Shiny framework. Then we will need contact server in the code chunk. Notice that this is a Quarto markdown option. Let me just double check that real quick. There we go. And there's one more thing. I was hoping to do it in this order, but it's not being nice to me. In the first code chunk, the one where you actually load the libraries, one of the frustrating things I came across, it would just tell me Tidyverse did not exist. It's like, of all things, it would tell me Tidyverse would not exist. You need to actually put in context setup in the code chunk that has your libraries in it. All right, let me just skip ahead. Maybe once I get all the code filled in, it'll work out. Okay, so what I'm trying to do in the sidebar, have a select input. And I thought for variety, we would also have a slider input. You'll notice that there were a couple different strings here. Let's focus on the select input. You'll notice that the second string basically tells the user what to do. We're going to ask them to choose a state, such as Connecticut or New York. The first string is the variable label, what this is going to be stored as, going from the user input into the server. You'll notice that for the variable label, I do not like to have spaces there. And that's my mindset. Wow. Just trying to uncomment this code real quick in a way that Zoom doesn't get mad at me. Good. Good. Okay, now finally, we get down to the plot. We have saved this plot as output state plot. Back to the user interface, we want to make a plot object with that exact same name from the output. And then for what I'm trying to do is then on the top right, be able to change that instead of saying just New Jersey, be able to switch that to whatever the user selected as well. So we have the state choice. And I want to put that here in the value box. Now, inside the value box, because this is a relatively simple line of code, we could do this inline. We have a text output and a variable name was state choice. Finally. Okay, apparently once everything's there, now it will work. I don't know about you. Whenever I see the words Alabama and Arkansas, I think of a certain song called Home. And we will eventually get to a place where we could select different states. Notice in the top right what's happening. At least the value box is changing as intended. I don't necessarily have the graph set up that way. All right, I made that needlessly complicated. Hopefully you understood what I meant by things like plot output and text output, because that is going to be our activity. Starting from template 2, see if you could get these things done. Go ahead and try that out. Maybe give you 10 minutes for that. Okay, I may have asked for several steps there, but just to review what you discovered, we had a shapefile that was made into a ggplot. Because it was a plot, you realized that you had to render that plot. From the slider input that was called year choice, if we wanted to display that simply as plain text in a, say, in a value box, you realize that you needed to render that text, which you did here in your value box for the year selection. Likewise, because you had sent the state map to the output, you were able to plot the output. Oh, and by the way, you notice that I moved the map to the bottom right. Just I thought the arrangement was better, giving the bar graph even more room. Thank you for the various comments in chat. I swear I've been using Shiny for years, and even to me, it's frustrating it quite often. All right, so take a deep breath, and we're gonna try to finish this off. We have so far made a dashboard, arranged things in a layout, put content in there, within the confines of the Shiny framework, that is the UI and the server. What we're trying to do now is to polish up the interactive stuff to actually be able to display the 50 states of data and to let the users select a year as well. So I believe I'm here at this moment. When I choose a state, it is correctly changing the word in the top right. But as you can imagine, I want to change that whole graph in the middle. Fortunately, for our purposes, when we talk about Shiny, dashboards, and now Tidyverse, the elementary stuff about Tidyverse works here. For example, instead of being so fixated on New Jersey, unlike my real life, maybe I want the user to pick the state instead. Remember that in Shiny, the user chooses a state here in what's called the select input. That gets saved into what's called state choice amongst the inputs. To put that into our code, no longer needing the quotation marks, we put input $, state choice. Let me see if this works out. But otherwise, this is dplyr as usual. So it is now correctly changing the graph by the states. The labels might be off at the moment. But I have that label of the ggplot here. And I want to do the same thing. I want to acknowledge that the user did an input of the state choice. Now Alabama is on the ggplot, and the title is changing as well. Looking at the bottom right, might have to hide that for a second. You'll notice that I have something called this selection. To affect the map, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to input the state choice. And I have to do a little bit more here. For the geom SF layer, I want to fill according to that variable that I just made. But what I'm trying to express is, compared to the bulk of ggplot code there, we only have to make a few minor adjustments in the tidyverse to now get this to do what we want. I'm focusing on the bottom right-hand corner by select, say, state of Washington. Now the state of Washington is highlighted. In the bottom right-hand corner, if I select Idaho, now the state of Idaho is selected. All right, folks, I have one more challenge for you. Starting from template 3, go ahead and see if you could get this done here in your breakout rooms. Good luck. All right, welcome back all. I know it's been a very quick 2 hours here. How are we doing? Any questions or discussion that came up?
So maybe one small thing I noticed is when you're working interactively, you sort of run your Shiny dashboard, but then you have to reload it every time you change the code, and it takes a while. So what I do to work around this is just to, in my interactive R session, create an input list. And then I can just iterate over my plots. And it only executes if the chunk is interactive. But I wonder what your workflow is for this.
I agree with you. Shiny experts, we literally just had a whole book club on this a few months back. They keep track of the whole entire execution flow model, and we'd have to worry about that. I don't have a set answer here, but I agree that if you had a complex Shiny app going, you definitely would have to worry about the execution model.
And my question was more like when you're developing the app and now, and say you want to make some small changes to your plot, do you reload the app every time?
At least at this level, I'm reloading the app every time, and I'm basically, my mindset is that I'm showing my coworkers the app for a few minutes. Yeah. Okay, so for this last activity, the intention was with this slider input, it changes the highlighted bar on the bar graph. And for that third value box, the one I have with the bug icon It also has the corresponding approximation for the number of bee colonies. Thank you for the comments in chat. Yes, I probably did have a typo in the instructions. For this particular slider input, that was the user interface code. Admittedly, with the whole numbers, the integer numbers, this particular user interface option might not have been the best. I chose to go with that because it corresponds to the horizontal left-right movement that we see in the bar plot. You observed that as the user is making that your choice, their selection is saved as your choice. So wherever we wanted to invoke that, we put in input your choice. So there and there. For that third value box, the one with the bug in it, we're talking about both state and year. Once again, I want to emphasize that the direct code from dplyr with filter works here. There was a bit of subtle code that when I wanted to render the text, I only wanted the number rather than an entire data frame. So I pulled the number out of the data frame in order to get this to work. All right, folks, so give yourselves a round of applause. You just made your interactive Quarto dashboard. For a few announcements, first of all, I want to thank Lydia for hosting this event and handling a lot of the administrative matters. And thanks to our wonderful teaching assistants, Federica and Jannik, for also putting up with my machinations and helping get this message across. As you can see on the screen, I want to give credit in particular to Professor Mine Setankaya-Rundell, who teaches at Duke and other places. That trio of videos made these Quarto dashboards very accessible to the rest of the R programmer community. I have also referred to the videos that you've seen linked there at the bottom. In particular, a pair of videos by Isabella Velasquez, who I believe presented that in our ladies' workshops. This one by Graph Courses was wonderfully accessible. Charles Teague was the person at Posit whose team made the Quarto dashboards, brought it to Quarto. Otherwise, beyond that, if you're interested in making some wonderfully great looking dashboards, you could do some more advanced stuff like go towards Display R as presented by Melissa Van Bussel, or you could go deeper into styling the HTML and CSS as mentioned by Albert Rapp. Finally, there's the notion of, well, what if you make a dashboard, what do you do with this? Elsewhere in the R programming universe, we might talk about publishing a document to say R pubs or Shiny apps or GitHub pages or something thereof. Admittedly, at this time, I didn't really focus on making an answer on what to do with your dashboard. Part of it is my own personal bias, is that the way I work with my coworkers and talking about students and student data, our data is confidential, so we don't actually share it publicly. As I said at the beginning, I picture these dashboards in situations where you're meeting in a small team and quickly sharing the work with each other, but you might not be in a position where you would share this publicly. Nevertheless, if you do want to share a dashboard publicly, there probably are options with GitHub pages, with Shiny apps, but you'd also have to be mindful of server fees and the hosting fees and such. Before I forget, today's files are also located at this GitHub repository that I put in the chat. And I also forgot to mention that the answers to today's code, as you probably figured, were in the last file, zzz.qmd, just in case you might have missed something and wanted to go back. If you do go back to the code, please use the code in the GitHub repository, because I no longer want to have you using up my server space. Otherwise, That's it from me, and want to thank you again for being here.
I believe you can download the files if you click more from, if you want specifically the ones on the Posit Cloud, you can download them. But yeah, thank you so much, Derek, for leading us through this workshop of interactive Quarto dashboards. Thank you again, Jannik and Federica, for serving as our TAs. And thank you all for joining today. I hope you got a lot out of it, and looking forward to seeing you around the Slack. Have a great day, everyone.